The Hitch-Hiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. Chapter 33. But the end never came. At least not then. Quite suddenly, the barrage stopped, and the sudden silence afterwards was punctuated by a couple of strangled gurgles and thuds. The four stared at each other. "What happened?" said Arthur. "They stopped," said Zayford with a shrug. "Why?" "Dunno. Do you want to go and ask them?" "No." They waited. "Hello?" called out Ford. No answer. "That's odd." "Perhaps it's a trap." "They haven't got the wit." "What were those thuds?" "Dunno." They waited a few more seconds. "Right," said Ford. "I'm going to have a look." He glanced around at the others. "Is no one going to say, 'No, you can't possibly let me go instead'?" They all shook their heads. "Oh, well," he said, and stood up. For a moment nothing happened. Then, after a second or so, nothing continued to happen. Ford peered through the thick smoke that was billowing out of the burning computer. Cautiously, he stepped out into the open. Still, nothing happened. 20 yards away, he could dimly see through the smoke the space-suited figure of one of the cops. He was lying in a crumpled heap on the ground. 20 yards in the other direction lay the second man. No one else was anywhere to be seen. This struck Ford as extremely odd. Slowly and nervously he walked towards the first one. The body lay reassuringly still as he approached it, and continued to lie reassuringly still as he reached it and put his foot down on the killer's up gun that still dangled from its limp fingers. He reached down and picked it up, meeting no resistance. The cop, he was quite clearly dead. A quick examination revealed him to be from Blagulon Kappa. He was a methane-breathing life form, dependent on his spacesuit for survival in the thin oxygen atmosphere of Magrathea. The tiny life support system computer on his backpack appeared unexpectedly to have blown up. Ford poked around in it in considerable astonishment. These miniature suit computers usually had the full backup of the main computer back on the ship, with which they were directly linked through the sub-ether. Such a system was fail-safe in all circumstances, other than total feedback malfunction, which was unheard of. He hurried over to the other prone figure and discovered that exactly the same impossible thing had happened to him, presumably simultaneously. He called the others over to look. They came, shared his astonishment, but not his curiosity. "Let's get shut of this hole," said Zayford. "If whatever I'm supposed to be looking for is here, I don't want it." Grabbed the second kilozap gun, blasted a perfectly harmless accounting computer, and rushed out into the corridor, followed by the others. He very nearly blasted hell out of an air car that stood waiting for them a few yards away. The air car was empty, but Arthur recognised it as belonging to Slightly Belfast. It had a note from him pinned to part of its sparse instrument panel. The note had an arrow drawn on it, pointing at one of the controls. It said, "This is probably the best button to press." The Hitch-Hiker's Guide to the Galaxy by Douglas Adams. Chapter 34. The aircar rocketed them at speeds in excess of R17 through the steel tunnels that led out onto the appalling surface of the planet, which was now in the grip of yet another drear morning twilight. Ghastly grey light congealed on the land. R is a velocity measure, defined as a reasonable speed of travel that is consistent with health, mental well-being, and not being more than, say, 5 minutes late. It is therefore clearly an almost infinitely variable figure according to circumstances, since the first two factors vary not only with speed taken as an absolute, but also with awareness of the third factor. Unless handled with tranquility, this equation can result in considerable stress, ulcers, and even death. R17 is not a fixed velocity, but it is clearly far too fast. The aircar flung itself through the air at R17 and above, deposited them next to the heart of gold, which stood starkly on the frozen ground like a bleached bourne, and then precipitately hurled itself back in the direction whence it had come, presumably on important business of its own. Shivering, the four of them stood and looked at the ship. Beside it stood another one. It was the Blagulon Kappa police craft, a bulbous, shark-like affair, slate green in colour and smothered with black stencilled letters of varying degrees of size and unfriendliness. The letters informed anyone who cared to read them where the ship was from, what section of the police it was assigned to, and where the power feeds should be connected. It seemed somehow unnaturally dark and silent, even for a ship whose two-man crew was at that moment lying asphyxiated in a smoke-filled chamber several miles beneath the ground. It was one of those curious things that is impossible to explain or define, but one can sense when a ship is completely dead. Ford could sense it and found it most mysterious. A ship and two policemen seemed to have gone spontaneously dead. In his experience, the universe simply didn't work like that. The other three could sense it too. But they could sense the bitter cold even more and hurried back into the heart of gold, suffering from an acute attack of no curiosity. Ford stayed and went to examine the Blagulon ship. As he walked, he nearly tripped over an inert steel figure lying face down in the cold dust. "Marvin!" he exclaimed. "What are you doing?" "Don't feel you have to take any notice of me, please," came a muffled drone. "But how are you, metal man?" said Ford. "Very depressed." "What's up?" "I don't know," said Marvin. "I've never been there." "Why?" said Ford, squatting down beside him and shivering. "Are you lying face down in the dust?" "It's a very effective way of being wretched," said Marvin. "Don't pretend you want to talk to me. I know you hate me." "No, I don't." "Yes, you do. Everybody does. It's part of the shape of the universe. I only have to talk to somebody, and they begin to hate me. Even robots hate me. If you just ignore me, I expect I shall probably go away." He jacked himself up to his feet and stood resolutely facing in the opposite direction. "The ship hated me," he said dejectedly, indicating the police craft. "That ship?" said Ford in sudden excitement. "What happened to it? Do you know?" "It hated me because I talked to it." "You talked to it?" exclaimed Ford. "What do you mean, you talked to it?" "Simple. I got very bored and depressed, so I went and plugged myself into its external computer feed. I talked to the computer at great length and explained my view of the universe to it," said Marvin. "And, what happened?" "It committed suicide," said Marvin, and stalked off back to the heart of gold.